Hey, so thank you all for joining us for how to make the most of your summer. My name is Tony Phelan, she, her, hers. I work in career exploration and alumni engagement at MAC. And I've got my colleague Stuart here from Career Exploration. He's going to be helping with some of the logistics and stuff in the chat and things like that. So he's here to help as well. And then we have two of our awesome alumni panelists, both part of the Macalester Alumni Board as well. So I am going to turn it over to them in a second to do intros. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to go through some logistics. So I have some questions to kick us off and can kind of keep the conversation going. But students, at any point, if something comes up where you have something that you want to ask or something, triggers a thought in your mind and you have a comment or something like that, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to that as soon as we can. Or when you can, this is obviously a very welcoming, casual environment. If you want to unmute at any point, you can do that too, and kind of jump in with any questions. So let's see. Oh, and students, if you could in the chat, just let us know your name, major and class year, if you're comfortable putting that in, just so we have an idea of who's all here. That might help the panelists tailor their answers to questions a little bit. All right, so I'm going to turn it over. I'll go in order that you're appearing on my screen. Diane, if you would give us a little bit of an intro, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Tony, and welcome to you all. And I hope you really feel free to just jump in and ask questions, because that's the only way that we know to help you and respond. So I am class of 1978, which seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't really. It was just in my mind's eye sometimes exactly where you are right now. I was a biology and a geology major. Back then, to be quite honest, there weren't many women, girls, as you know, that were biology and geology majors. And I ended up through a whole pathway of my own, going from doing a PhD in microbiology at the University of Minnesota, did an MBA in marketing from Fairleigh Dickinson, which is in New Jersey. I ended up selling chemicals, working for the natural gas industry, working in energy in general, into doing hazardous waste work, hazardous waste cleanup, to what I do right now, which is running a company devoted to renewable natural gas. So that's waste to energy systems. That's taking garbage or landfill gas or wastewater treatment gas or anaerobic digester gas from dairy waste or other ag sources and putting it into productive use instead of emitting it to the environment. So when people hear what I do right now, they get really excited. It's like, how did you do that? Like I just stepped into it the minute I left MAC. And what you'll hear is there's many stories that the careers you're going to be really happy about don't exist today. And that's part of your pathway. And that's what we're going to explore today is how do you get to not only a career that you love, but to be honest, it loves you, because that has to come together, right? So I'm going to welcome my additional Macalester alumni, Stephanie, as well.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session. I'm Stephanie Green, class of 1987. I was an economics and business major. I kind of concentrated in accounting because when I left high school, I knew that I wanted to be a CPA. I am not a CPA. I went the graduate school route, and so I got my master's in business from Georgia State University. I'm currently in Atlanta. I am from Atlanta, so I went from Atlanta to Minnesota, stayed in Minnesota for about 11 years, and then I joined the Peace Corps, and I was in Central America for about 3 years, and then I came home in Atlanta. So I am back here. Mainly my career has taken the progression of corporate accounting, corporate finance, corporate accounting, and then did a little bit of that internationally. I started off at IDS Financial Services, which used to be, well, it's Ameriprise Financial right now, but it used to be IDS Financial Services, who were then bought by American Express, and now it's Ameriprise. So I was with them for 7 years, climbing the corporate ladder. then decided that the snow was too much for me in Minnesota, left Minnesota, went to Central America, worked with micro businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and some international NGOs for about 3 years. And then came home, Atlanta, and then I actually did some recruitment with Peace Corps for a couple of years. So that was very different. I wanted to share my wonderful experience with other people. So I traveled to Tennessee and Mississippi and Georgia, mostly the Southeast region, telling students about Peace Corps. And then I decided it was time to get back to work. So I went back to corporate, worked for the natural gas industry, Atlanta Gas Light, for a number of years, and then decided that it was time to go abroad again. So then I joined a company that was global, which was Novartis. And sat here. Novartis is a pharmaceutical company, and one of their regional offices is here. Used to be Supervision, which is now Alcon. And but I had some international projects with Novartis in Switzerland and London, and then came back here and actually joined a nonprofit organization, which plays in the global space. We send medical supplies and equipment to hospitals and clinics all over. And so I've been with them for a number of years, and I am Director of Finance and Human Resources at MedShare International. So that's a little bit about me. Alrighty.
Great. Thank you both.
Sure.
So as you can all see, a variety of backgrounds here on the call. And so I would love to know what the two of you, so part of this topic is, people do a lot of different things with their summers when they're a student in life in general, but especially as a student. There's so many options: working part-time, going back to maybe your hometown and working, maybe it's doing an internship, a formalized internship, maybe it's paid, maybe it's unpaid. Some people are taking classes right now. So I would love to know what the two of you did with your summers, maybe what you wish you had done, or things you're really glad that you did with your summers.
So I can start on that. I'm originally from Western New York, although by the time that I had applied to Macalester, my family had moved to the Chicagoland area, which is where I'm living right now. But, my first summer out, really internships were not only very hard to come by, they were very rare. We didn't think internships so much. So I did a bunch of eclectic jobs that frankly, I wouldn't have given up for the world, really. I ended up moving to Faribault, which maybe it's very close to Mac, with a bunch of my friends. And I worked in the turkey factory there. And then at night I waitressed. And I continued to do that waitressing thing when I worked at Mac because I was a financial aid kid. I couldn't necessarily afford to have my parents pay for me, and I had to do work study. So I worked in what was then the food service, which didn't have a word then. It wasn't Kagan, it wasn't any of that. We just called it Saga. I worked at Saga and I cleaned tables. And then I also, like I said, I worked at the turkey factory and I worked in waitressing. Other summers, I continued that waitressing here in Chicago. And then in other summers, I did what would be an extension of a program I got into working at Argonne National Labs. So that was a 29-week program that extended through the summer. That was on the tail ender of the London Florence program, which was the study abroad that I had done when I was at Mac. And then my senior year, by then I was ready to get a job. But I have to tell you, and you'll hear this from many people, that these jobs where you work with the public and you work with all different kinds of people are incredibly invaluable because you learn to read people very well. And you learn to understand how to work with teams without being intellectual. It's just that automatic cog in the wheel where you're understanding the mechanisms around you. I'll give you a great example. When at the turkey factory, which is in Faribault, there is a deaf school that may still exist. It's very famous down in Faribault area. So I would be working in a turkey factory with many deaf young people, maybe even people my age or a little bit older. They had talents that I never had. I could speak like I'm speaking to you right now, and they'd exactly know what I was saying, which I thought was, oh my gosh, what is this? They knew to read people's emotion much better than I could, what people needed. And I really, that resonated with me, to try to understand how to read people better, to anticipate what they wanted, when they wanted it, and when to back off the situation. And that's something you don't learn in a classroom. You learn that through working with various types of people. And so I found that those day-to-day interactions to be really important, because in the future, my knowledge, that got me so far, but my ability to read a situation, I think, is the way that I got to where I am, because I kind of listened to who was complaining over here, and then I saw the solution in another part of my life. And so that those easy connections, or as I say, connect the dots, is really an important part. So I loved working those jobs. They were really long and hard, but I liked it.
I completely agree, Diane. So I was more traditional. Again, I think from high school, I sort of kind of knew that I wanted to be in accounting and finance. That's kind of weird. And so prior to my freshman year at Mac, I actually had two jobs. I worked with a bookkeeper, and I also worked at sort of like a camp. And so I think that sort of helped me freshman year in terms of me tailoring. I mean, I had a beeline. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a CPA. And so everything that I was going to do from that point on was going to lead me to being a CPA. And so, I worked with a bookkeeper prior to, freshman year. And then I think there was a college fair throughout the year for like summer internships and jobs and things like that. And I think I went to a college fair and I interviewed with a number of organizations, and I got a job with Cargill for the summer. So, it turns out that, I mean, it was corporate, but it was not finance. It wasn't accounting. It was like data entry. And so, but it was fine because it gave me an exposure to the corporate world. And so after that, I looked around. So my other summers were that, and then I actually did urban studies in Chicago when I was at Macalester. So instead of going abroad, I went to Chicago and spent the semester there. And while I was there, I also did an internship at a CPA firm on LaSalle Street, which is Wall Street in Chicago. And that was like my first full CPA internship. And I was so bored. We mostly did auditing, for those of you who know anything about accounting, business, whatever. We mostly did auditing, and then I did some other reconciliations and whatever. I was so bored. I was so bored. And the only time I was excited was when I found errors during the audits. And I was like, oh, this is not a career. I can't do this. But anyway, so I thought maybe it was just that CPA firm. So when I came back the next summer, I actually, I said Cargill at first. First it was Burroughs, which is now Unisys. And then the second summer was Cargill. And that was much better. And then after the internship in Chicago at the CPA firm, I actually did an internship at a CPA firm in Minneapolis, which was much
different than the CPA firm that I did at Chicago, which sparked my interest a little bit more. So, like I said, it was more traditional, the accounting path. So I was there, CPA, and then I was going into senior year, and there was another career fair. And so I interviewed with all these firms, and the following summer, senior year, I actually had my job. So following the senior year, I actually had my job working at IDS, starting in their corporate accounting program. So it was more traditional for me in terms of the accounting. Again, from the start, I knew I love numbers. I like work with numbers. Just numbers on the brain. So I knew that I wanted to be in finance and accounting. And so, I did everything possible to get as much experience as possible to learn what I did like, what I didn't like.
And in the end, I actually did not, I sat for the CPA exam, but realized that I didn't necessarily need it in corporate accounting. So, I sort of ixed that because I wasn't going to go and work at a CPA firm. So it was more traditional, even though, I started off at the camp. I didn't work in high school, but my senior year, my parents allowed me to work. So I did the camp, I did the bookkeeping, and so the rest is history. But I would say that if I think about it, and as I interview currently, I have a dual role at the nonprofit organization I work with, and that's finance and human resources. And so I interview a lot of candidates for positions that we have available. And often, I'm looking at, it doesn't necessarily, if you look at your resume, your CV, your history, everything doesn't necessarily have to tie to the job that you're currently applying for, but we're looking for, where's the progression, because you can learn, skills and experience from any experience that you have. You can learn communication skills, you can learn project management skills, you can learn leadership skills. And so those are some of the things, you learn people skills. And so those are some of the things that we're looking for, not necessarily that you actually did this all your life, but that you've done something productive, you've learned some lessons, you've learned how to apply it to, your next phase in life. And so that's a little bit of my story and some advice. Tony?
Thank you. You led right into my next question. That's great. My next question was going to be, so whether it's something that you had to do or in your role hiring people, how do you recommend someone talk about, if they have had part-time jobs, or maybe they took some classes and got experience here and there, or did research, or whatever it might be. And it feels, because I'm one of these people, I feel like it on a resume doesn't all fit together. How do you tell your story in an interview when you feel like your experience is kind of all over the place? How do you tie that together?
Well, I can start on that. Before I started my company, I was a director of a research division at the Gas Technology Institute, GTI, in Chicago. And I had 24 people who worked for me, PhDs to young technicians right out of school. And I was really interested in the full person. I was really interested in what they really were turned on by. And that means everything from what are their hobbies, what kind of individuals they were, to sort of the kind of skills that they would have obtained working with people in groups. And so I like to take a look at people that have got a great story where they pulled together a number of different aspects of either one or numerous jobs that tie a story together. So it's sort of, you stand away, you step above the situation at hand and talk about the bigger picture things to do. And the way that I describe this is that sometimes we all have little jobs, or we have, whatever we're engaged in. And your mom or your dad might ask, what are you doing? And it's like, oh God, if I was to tell them exactly what I'm doing, I'm going to lose them in 2 seconds. But what you'll say is, you know what I really do? I organize, I redesign, I do this, I do that. You use big picture words. If you can wrap a story around those big picture words to describe you, and don't forget about who you are as well, what you like and what you don't like, then you create the picture of who you are. Frankly, for me, I don't really care that you worked in a lab, because I can always teach you those skills. I had a ton of people working in a lab. I like those people who are problem solvers. That's me personally, because I like to give them, I'm thinking about this, guys, help me figure out the solution. And if they're problem solving and they're listening to each other and they've got that skill set that merges what you guys have, what we have, the arts and the sciences together, and we're verbally very good for the most part. If you can merge those pieces together, you're a really powerful individual. So that's my suggestion, is to merge the big ticket or big word items together and create your own story.
I echo those sentiments also, Diane. I would say that, there's always lessons to be learned from whatever you decide to do. I would say, talk about, one of the things that we look for at my organization is passion. And, you can have, you could be the most successful accountant, the most successful fundraiser, but if you don't have passion for who we are and what we do in our culture or yourself or your story, then there's a disconnect there. And so I would say have passion about what you did. I mean, if you, dog walk, for the entire summer, talk a little bit about, some of your successes, there was 20 dogs and, this little French poodle, who just, warmed my heart, I would say talk about your successes, some results, lessons learned, learn about the company that you're interviewing with and tie those things to that company. There's all kinds of information on the internet in regards to companies that are out there. There's so much information, and that's one of the disappointing things as we interview candidates. If you don't, we have so much information about our company. If you don't know the basic things about our company, if you can't talk about how your passion or things that you've done in the past have tied to what you can do at our company, that's kind of a disconnect as well. So I would say, talk about some of the things that you learned, some of the, personal growth or things, skills that you've developed and successes that you have regardless of what the field was, and tie that to the company and the job that you're applying for.
Great.
Tony.
Great advice. Thank you. So I really appreciate you both talking about that and kind of how to look at the bigger picture and really give an employer a holistic view of who you are rather than just what your job duties were. So we've all been in situations where maybe we are working in a job, we're not really sure how it ties to our long-term career path, but we know we have to do it to make money, or maybe you're taking a class that is required and you're like, well, this doesn't really relate, but I got to do it to meet this requirement or whatever it might be. How do you stay motivated when you're in those situations and I guess ideally still try to learn something from those situations when you feel like you're kind of stuck doing something and it doesn't directly tie to long-term goals?
I'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, as Stephanie described, it's true that when you have many different jobs, that it teases out things from you that you maybe didn't realize existed. And I will come back to saying this many, many times. I have a daughter who's about your age, and she lives in Atlanta right now. Stephanie, she's going to Emory, a graduate student, and she really wants to work for the Carter Foundation. And I said, why do you want to work for the Carter Foundation? Well, because it's the Carter Foundation. It's like, what's that got to do with anything? It's an image that you all, or maybe she has, of what she might anticipate. Most people might say, I want to work for the CDC, but she happens to know things about the CDC that maybe she doesn't like. So the point is that when you engage in different jobs, even though they're unappealing, I would do a self-assessment about why it's not appealing to you, rather than just saying, I don't like it. Is it because it's too much of the same thing over and over, or it doesn't allow me to stretch my brain, or it's too much activity? I like to sit at my desk and really work. Why are they always bouncing me around? I can't focus. And those personal characteristics, honestly, I don't care what major it is, that's what's going to have success for you in the future, because you ultimately have to wake up and go to bed with you. And if you're not a person who likes bouncing around, or you're not like a person who sits at a lab bench and does the same thing over and over to get a result, then maybe again, you love what you're doing, but it doesn't really love you. That the success has to be on both ends of the spectrum. And I'll give you a personal example. When I entered graduate school, I mean, this is 6 years at the University of Minnesota. I did my postdoc at Yale. I thought I would love being at the bench because I really like focusing. I'm a person who focuses very well, but that just wasn't doing it for me. And I just, all of a sudden, a lot of insecurities crept up inside of me. And I realized sitting at a bench is not where it's going to happen for me. So that really changed things for me, right? I'm getting a PhD in this. What is it going to do? What it did is encouraged me to pull out those other pieces of me and then leverage the knowledge I had and take it some other place. So those self-assessments, that's the biggest thing about summer jobs. It's not about actually what you're doing, because you're going to do it for 3 months. But that self-assessment is a really important thing. Don't you think, Stephanie?
I completely agree, because you never know when you might use those skills. I mean, I remember, for example, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, there's a thing that's called like ET, early termination. And, so you have a lot of people, get in country, and it's not at all what they've romanticized about being in the Peace Corps. And we had, quite a number of people when I was in Guatemala that left within the first or second week because it was just not what they expected. And, and I thought about it myself because here I was, this person had, at least 7 years of, corporate experience, climbing the corporate ladder. And then all of a sudden, I'm in Guatemala, walking 2 miles to the training center, from my house, sleeping on a bed just made out of wood. I was just like, what the heck am I doing here? But I stuck it out. And I'm so glad I stuck it out because I believe in something that's kind of weird called deja vu. And I tell you, my 3 years there, I had so many, moments where it's like, oh my God, I've already done this, or I've already seen this, or I've seen this before, or it was so bizarre, but that's where I was supposed to be. And I was using skills or learning skills or doing things that are pulling back from experiences and skills that I had previously that I thought were like disposable skills. I'll never use this again or whatever. But, I found myself in a situation where I was, teaching, in Spanish, some small businessmen about, bookkeeping, as a matter of fact, or how to distinguish, your product from your neighbor's product. I mean, it was so bizarre. So I think, you basically have to, look at what's around you. And if you're not specifically doing what you thought you were going to do or like to do, look around you, look at the bigger picture and say, okay, so let me be a success at this, but then look at my coworker or, this other manager here. Are they doing some things that I might enjoy doing as well? Why couldn't I take on another project? Have a conversation with them. Hey, what do you do? Or is that, look and see if the things that I think that I want to do, can I do it in another capacity, at the organization? So you might not be, the thing that you're being paid to do might not be the thing that you want to do, but then it might be an opportunity to be at that organization at that time to do it somewhere else or take on another project or, add another skill set or, build your network. So, you have to look at the entire situation and not just look at, all I'm doing is typing in, these cue cards. What else is available? Look around. What else is available? Talk to other people that are in the organization. What else? Here's what I'd love to do. Is there an opportunity to volunteer to do this, in the company? So you just never know. There's so many possibilities. The possibilities are endless. So I would say, just don't focus on one thing. Just be open to, what else is around. What else is in my purse or my toolkit, or what can I learn from, if I'm not learning it from Stan, maybe I can learn it from, Steven on the other end. So I would just say be open minded and just know that the possibilities are endless.
Thank you. I'm very glad we're recording this because there's so much great, not only advice for summers, but just general career advice in here. So thank you. Stephanie, you started mentioning this a little bit. We have a couple questions in the chat. The first one is, how important would you say networking has been for your career journeys? And how do you go about networking? When did you kind of start consciously trying to do networking? And I'm using my quotes here because networking can take many forms, but kind of that networking for a career type of thing.
So I don't think I ever thought about networking as a career. I don't think it was a thing back when I was in school, but it was just getting to know people. What do they do? Where are they from? Who do they know? And I have a couple of good examples. When I moved to Minnesota, I had never been to Minnesota before. I mean, I didn't come and visit the school. Actually, Macalester was on my list of schools, but it wasn't the top school. So I didn't make it as much of a priority as some of the other schools that were on my list. And so by the time I decided to accept the invite from Macalester, it didn't make sense for me to come to Minnesota when I would be coming there in, just a few short months for freshman orientation. But I remember one of the ways that I was convinced to look a little closer at the Macalester invitation was from an alum from my high school. He called and because he heard that I decided to go with another school pick, and he wanted to really, really sell me on Macalester. And so one of his concerns was that the fact that, he was from Atlanta, like I said, we went to the same high school. He was concerned that, that there would be a bit of culture shock coming to Minnesota since, I go from hot to cold, go from the South to the Midwest, and he really wanted to sell me on Minnesota. And one of his last lines was that if you ever need anything, know that I'm here for you. And, because, I didn't have relatives there, my closest cousin, I think it was in Chicago. And so that was a concern, my father was like, no, I think that's great. My mother was like, no, stay in Georgia, so, so him having that assurance from him that if there were any issues or concerns that, that my parents could always call him and say, hey, can you go check on Stephanie or whatever. And so I didn't know this guy, my guidance counselor knew him. And like I said, he was alum from the school. And so, when I got there, he stuck to his promise. My freshman year college roommate was also from my high school. So we both left Atlanta and came to Macalester, and she decided that she wouldn't stick it out. But he would, call us up occasionally, take us out, for church and brunch. And I got to see more of Minnesota. And I think that's where Minnesota became more of a possibility than just the Macalester campus. He introduced us to his network, which at the time he was a professional, he was a finance professional. Like I say, he graduated from Macalester. I think he was like a triple major or whatever, Carnegie Mellon grad school, all of this. And so he was just, one of those perfect mentors and role models. And as a result of, me meeting him, I met other people. And so that ties to the internship that I had in Minneapolis at the CPA firm. I worked, in Minneapolis at the CPA firm, and then it turns out that it was a small business, and the owner of the business did taxes and all kinds of things for celebrities in Minneapolis. And so I started meeting some of the Minneapolis celebrities, one of which actually was a Macalester alum. His name escapes me right now, but he's an actor. He's an A-level actor, and he's been in a number of films, but his name will come to mind. But I remember sitting, reconciling some ledgers in the office, and Carl Lumbly is his name. And he walked into the office, and I was just like, oh my God, and also that leads to when I went to the career fair. This is like senior year. When I went to the career fair and interviewed with a number of organizations, corporations that were at the career fair, one of the interviewees had also knew the owner of the CPA firm that I worked in. And so I met him when he walked into the office. And so when I was making the rounds with the interviewing, I saw him and I was like, oh my God, I know you through Barry Rogers. And so I think, that made me more comfortable when I was interviewing with him, those few minutes. And then I think, that helped in bringing me back to the company to actually do the second and the third interviews. And then they hired me full time. So, when I was working at the CPA firm, or when I decided to come to Macalester and Cecil was my mentor or whatever, I wasn't thinking about networking. I was just going about business, picking a school, staying at school, wanting to be a CPA, working at the CPA firm. And as a result, I met all these people, and they were all, significant in my life, later on. And so everybody is value, and everybody is value added. So, it's not just, I know people kind of hate that term networking because you're kind of fearful that you might say the wrong thing or they might have the wrong impression. But, just go about and meet people. You never know what comes out of the relationship. My fiance now, I remember going here in Atlanta, going to a finance conference, and I actually only went to the finance conference. There's so many of them. I only went to this finance conference because it was held at the Coca-Cola Museum here in Atlanta, and I was excited about trying all these, flavors of Coke from all over the world. And so there was a dinner the night before, and then the conference was the next 2 days. And so I went to the dinner, and I was so excited about going to try the different flavors of Coke. And I found out that they had shut that part down. So we weren't going to be able to sample any Coke. So like, whatever. But then I saw this guy, and I was just like, oh, hi, how are you? And I'm just, you just say, hi, how are you? You're at the same conference or whatever. And, we were at the conference or whatever. Probably 2 weeks later, I had given him my business card. 2 weeks later, I was meeting some girlfriends for happy hour. And one of them said, hey, my insurance guy, I was doing insurance with this guy. Well, she's the insurance person. So I was doing insurance with one of my clients, and he said he's met you at this finance conference. So I'm just saying, and now, we are, betrothed and, on our way to down the aisle or whatever. But you just have to be open to just meeting people because everybody has value. You have value, just, find some things that are in common. It could be language, it could be travel, it could be, school, it could be, I hate math, just meet people just for the sake of meeting people. And I know it's a long answer. I'm sorry, Diane. I'll let you go next.
No, what you said is really important. I completely agree with you, actually, because I like connecting dots as well. And everyone's got a story. And if you learn people's stories, you learn a lot about not only their journey, but how they started, but to just the little networking piece. Networking is research. So especially right now, your ability to do research is far better than we had when we started. We did it. We had to do a lot of it longhand. Newspapers, you'd find the job in the newspaper. I mean, we actually networked exactly what Stephanie said before there was a word network. Now, I just love that sort of story about getting to know people and how they did their pathway. They might know other people and so on and so forth. And if you remember along the way who might have been of interest, then that's a good way to start. But, you know, I would immediately right off the top use Mac Direct. If you want to connect with McAllister people love helping McAllister people. So, I mean, that's a great way to start. Start with Mac Direct, other alums, this kind of thing. Then start to exactly what Stephanie said. There are a number of conferences on a yearly basis that you can attend as a student. There's a student discount. Yeah, it costs a little money, but that's the way it is. And you go, and that's a great place to go with your resume. There might even be a jobs board there, and you can post there. So that's another great suggestion. Third one is to just sort of look at societies that might exist. And if even if it's just getting on the email chains, that's a good way to pursue it as well. Or friends of your parents who might be having different jobs. So yes, and that, for me personally, because it was before exactly what Stephanie said, there was the word networking, we had to use our resources. You had to sort of follow the path and you do your own research. It was very longhand back then, but you did it. And it was useful because it does help you find which way you would like to go.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I would add on to that just briefly. I think both of you kind of alluded to this too, but networking is also, it's a two-way street. I'm sure you've all heard that. So sometimes networking, the way that some people think of it is take, but it's a two-way street. Eventually you will be able to help that other person in some way or pay it forward in some way in the future. So, moving on to the next question, we have another student question in the chat. Do you recommend continuing education after undergrad? So you both went to grad school. How has that affected your career, personal life? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. You know, I'll say this flat out. I don't recommend going to grad school right after college. The reason being is that you have to, especially a PhD program, and I'll speak from that, you have to absolutely love what you're doing. And you don't know what you love at this point. And that's simply a default. I'm going to keep going to school. And I think that's also a recipe for failure, because you may end up in something that you really don't like. And now you're invested so much into it that you feel you have to finish. I actually, when I got out of Mac, I was going to be a ski bum in Vail for a year. I went out with a boyfriend and we were going to, ski for a year, and then we were going to go to grad school or something like this. And it turns out that fell apart after about 2 months. So I came back home and I took a job in sales in the chemicals industry. I worked for Union 76 and I ended up in New York City selling sales. True story, 340 guys, 4 women. And so I learned a whole lot that I didn't think I'd ever learn. But during that time, that company allowed me to get my MBA for free. They paid for it. By then, I knew I really wanted to go to do microbiology, but I knew exactly what I wanted to do it in. So then I started my own internal research to find out which way I was going to go, so that when I launched into my PhD, I really knew what I wanted versus other students who just kind of showed up and didn't really know why they were there clearly or what they wanted to do with it. They just knew they didn't have that perfect job on the outside, which frankly, guys, it doesn't exist unless you create it. So, and that's part of the learning thing about yourself and others And I don't recommend going straight on. I think you should really struggle a little with a couple of jobs and further understand why you want to go the direction you want to go. What it did in my personal life. I mean, yeah, a PhD program is really hard. I'm going to be honest with you. I went back for a 10-year reunion, and I realized that something like 50% of the women in my class were married by the age of 24. I wasn't. I was married at the age of 34. I had my first kid when I was 38. I had my second when I was 41. And I wouldn't have done anything different because I really loved what I was doing. And I didn't feel the pressure at all to get married or have that perfect life the way everybody else did, because I was living my own perfect life, you know? So it's a journey, but you make it your own. You know, you guys can be kings and queens still. You can do anything you want at your age. So go for it.
I have to agree with Diane. I think though it kind of depends on your major and what the ultimate goal is. You know, I can't speak for all professions, but you know, maybe in a teaching profession, it helps to, you know, because I think they have internships throughout the curriculum or whatever, but you might have to have your master's degree, you know, to compete with, you know, existing teachers. I'm not sure, you know, if you're a French major, you know, depending on what you want to do with that French, you might, you know, it might be helpful to go directly into grad school. I mean, I have my MBA, and I did not. I got mine actually, you know, long time after when I got back to Atlanta, as a matter of fact. But I have a passion for learning. I love learning, and so I like those formal settings. So I knew at that point that if I wanted to get to a higher level in my career, that I needed to have an advanced degree. And I also wanted to, with the, you know, I was so focused on finance and accounting that I was kind of like stuck in this, you know, this one path, and I wanted to broaden my skill set in business. And so, you know, that afforded me marketing and all the other things that go with the MBA. So, you know, the timing was perfect for me. You know, I was working for a corporation. You know, some of the projects that, you know, I was working on while I was getting my MBA, I was applying some of those skills and experiences to, you know, current work life. And that was the price to pay for my company to pay for the tuition while I was doing that. But I think it kind of depends on what the, you know, what your path is, what your career path is. I certainly think that, you know, probably, you know, part of the application process for grad school is that you've had some additional work experience. I mean, that makes you more competitive as an applicant. And so, you know, having, you know, a year or two of work experience, I think that helps define even more so what your passions are, what your interests are when you do apply for that program. And I think also it makes you competitive as an applicant. So certainly in hindsight, you know, I don't think I would have gone directly into grad school, but I do recognize that there are some professions where it makes you more competitive if you have your graduate degree with people who've been in the business for a while.
Thank you both for those answers. Always a big topic of discussion. I know whether or not to keep continuing on with school or put it off, and it's a big decision. So thank you both. So keeping an eye on time, I just wanted to throw it out there one more time and open it up to the both of you. If there's any kind of last advice that you want to leave us with, any topics that we didn't cover that you wish we had related to this, I will just open it up now and let the two of you speak.
There's two just a couple of things else that I'll mention that are really helpful. I think for you, where you are in your life right now, think wide instead of deep. So look sideways rather than down, if you know what I mean. Don't look at the end game, look sideways a bit to embrace all of the experiences you have along the way, because that in the long run will make your career a happy career for you. I have to agree with Stephanie. I'm going to be honest. I kind of knew what I wanted to do at the age of 3 or something crazy. I always knew I wanted to do microbiology. And because Earth Day started in 1970 and I was a freshman in high school, I knew I wanted to do something environmental. That was always in my pocket. But that was it. I had 2 words, right? Environmental and microbiology. And if I looked sideways, it allowed me the breadth of understanding how many ways that could go, rather than saying, I want to do this and do this and do this. Because as it turns out, that may not, first of all, by the time you get there, it may not exist. And secondly, you didn't create it. You want to create something that's your own. And I'm going to say this in particular to the women on the panels right now too, is you are strong individuals. Get a good handshake, get a good look in the eye, put that persona together and own it. I find that when I interview men and women, young men and younger women, that the men somehow wrap it together pretty well. And the women, there's still this back off thing. And I want you to own who you are. You're powerful people and you graduated from a great college. And I want you to get that good handshake and own it because you deserve it. And regardless of what happens, so this is you. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud that you got through MAC and with your career. So you should be proud of it too and show it.
I agree with Diane wholeheartedly. Again, I tell people that, I tell my nieces and nephews that your job, in high school is to learn and make mistakes, because that's the safe environment to make those mistakes. The same in college. That's where you experiment and you make those mistakes. My freshman year, again, I came in, my advisor was Carl Egge, and I said, listen, I know what I want to do. I know what I want to be. And so you just need to help me, chart that path to get there. And he looked at me and he said, oh, okay. And he said, well, let me just say, I agree with you, but let me just say that let's do this. Let's have you take some classes in this department and take some classes in that department and take some classes in that department, so that you just confirm that that's really what you wanted to do. And so I took a sociology class, and I took a psychology class, and I took art or music appreciation class. And I was just like, what am I doing? But I was so glad that I took those classes, because I learned things in those classes that, that are part of me and that I use today. And so, again, like Diane said, think broad, not deep, because, if we talk about networking, you have a whole campus full of people to network with. One of the things that I loved about Macalester was the fact that there were people, students, colleagues from all over the world. If I wanted to learn about Kenya, my, peer down hallway from Kenya, he could tell me about living in Nairobi. Or if, I wanted to learn about, what it was really like to grow up in South Africa, my friend Sabello, could tell me about, growing up in South Africa. That you have a campus full of people to network with, and you never know, where that might lead. So I would say start there. And then I would say just to that also be true. Know who you are, know what you like, and just be flexible. It might not look like it's going to turn out the way that you want, but it might be that it turns out the best way. So just be open, flexible, talk to people on campus. I am an avid traveler, travel, learn how to play an instrument, learn another language, teach another language. Working at the nonprofit organization I work with now, we're always looking for volunteers. If you need some experience, go to a nonprofit organization. They're always looking for volunteers, always looking for volunteers. I guarantee you that you'll have a lot more flexibility working as a volunteer, in that organization than trying to get somebody to pay you to input, all those cue cards. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Well, students, if we could give them a virtual round of applause, however you want to do that, if you want to use your reactions, or I like to just clap in the screen. Thank you both so much for your time, and students, thank you for your engagement and your questions and for joining us today. Like I said, this is recorded. Stuart just dropped a survey in the chat. So students, if you could go ahead and fill that out, we're always trying to improve our events. So we love your feedback. And then Diane and Stephanie, if you would be willing to drop contact information, whether that's, if you prefer people find you on LinkedIn or email, whatever it might be, if you could put that in the chat, that would be awesome. And then students can follow up with you as needed if they want to continue the conversation, or if they want to ask you more specific things about your career paths. So yeah, this will be recorded and posted soon. And I hope everyone has a great long weekend. And thanks again.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.